Why is English such a difficult language to sing in? If you saw my first video on the singer's language, we addressed lots of topics around modifying words for singing, and those were general guidelines really for any language, but a lot of you had questions about certain things that come up specifically in the English language, so that's what we're talking about today. Welcome back to Singing Tips with LJD Studios, the space where we talk about singing in ways that you can actually understand, breaking down difficult concepts so that you can be more successful in your singing. I'm Laura, and today we're talking about modifications that you need to make to words that come up specifically in English. But before we get into it, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you don't miss a video. And if you haven't already, make sure you download my free guide, The Three-Tiered Approach to Becoming a Better Singer. I want to make sure you have that. There's lots of great info in that, multiple videos along with a PDF, and it's all yours for absolutely free. And coming out soon is my membership, where you'll get access to more in-depth videos, live master classes, a complete library of vocal exercises, and video feedback directly from yours truly. So stay tuned for that if you're interested in joining the membership program. One of the most important rules of the singer's language is remembering that when we are singing, we want to sustain the vowel, not the consonant. Now, I go into that idea much more in depth in the video on the singer's language, part 1. I'll make sure to have that linked in the description. But suffice it to say, if we're singing something like happy birthday, right? We're not going happy birthday to you, right? We're going happy birthday to you. The vowel gets really, really lengthened. What you might see come up more is when you have things like M and N's or V's. Sometimes we really like to kind of hang on to those consonants rather than the vowel. So for instance, in the word love, we might be tempted to do something like love versus love, right? So that's what it means to sustain the vowel. But something tricky happens quite often in English where we have a word that in order to pronounce that word, you have to sustain the consonant. The consonant is almost functioning like a vowel in a way. So for instance, like the word river, river. Yeah, there's a vowel in there, but when you say it, you don't really hear the vowel, right? It's sort of like we sustain that R sound, river. Same thing can happen with an L. It might be like sparkle, twinkle, right? It's it takes up a whole syllable. And while there is a vowel in the word in terms of the way we write it, you don't hear it in the speech. And it doesn't sound quite so ugly when we speak it because we're not really sustaining it that long. Sparkle, river, right? But when we sing, things get lengthened, right? You might be holding a syllable for 4 whole counts, 8 counts, whatever. And you certainly don't want to be singing river, right? Like, is that Joni Mitchell song? Like a river I could sail away on, right? Can't quite remember how it goes. But anyways, if she sang river, no one would think that sounded good. So what are we gonna do? Enter the schwa. What is a schwa? It kind of looks like an upside down lowercase e. And the sound it makes is this. So when we encounter a word in English specifically where you have an R or an L at the end of the word that would usually take up an entire syllable. So again, like sparkle, twinkle, river, lover, that kind of thing. Instead of saying ol or and sustaining that sound, you're going to change it to That's the sound of a schwa. And you might sort of round toward an R or toward an L at the end, and I'll get into that in a moment. But the vowel that you're going to sustain is that sound of the schwa. So since I can't quite remember how the Joni Mitchell song goes, I'm going to sing one that maybe some of you know, maybe you don't. It has more of like a religious background. But it's the song Shall We Gather at the River. Right, now if I sang, shall we gather at the river where bright angels' feet have trod, right? That doesn't sound great when I sustain the or on the word angel, right? If I say angel's feet. So now I'm going to switch it to the sound instead. Shall we gather at the river where bright angels' feet have trod? Okay, so sounds a lot prettier than Now, you want it to still sound natural, right? You don't want it to sound like you're modifying it so much, like maybe you don't even know how to actually pronounce the word, right? Particularly like if you're not a native English speaker and you're trying to make it sound really authentic. If you don't put a little bit of an R on at the end or a little bit of an L at the end, it might be more obvious that English is not your first language. And usually when we're singing in a language that is not our first language, we're trying as hard as we can to make it sound like maybe it is our first language. I know I've certainly done that in my past when I sang opera, Italian, French, German, right? You spend forever trying to make sure you get the pronunciation just right as though it was your first language. So now, I'm not just going to say river. I'm going to say river. Do you hear at the end I go right? So there is still an R. Shall we gather at the river where bright angels' feet have trod? And you hear it, angels. There's just a little bit of an L that comes in there at the end. So I'm not saying angels, right? The vowel is but at the very end, l gets in there. Shall we gather at the river where bright angels' feet have trod? So in English, when you have a word that ends with an sound or an ol sound and it takes up an entire syllable, that's when you're going to modify using a schwa. Now I want to be clear, if you have a word that starts with an R or starts with an L, there's no modification needed. You're going to sustain the vowel that follows it. So for instance, the word river, I still say the R, the way I ordinarily would. It happens quickly because I'm going to sustain the I. River. So there's no modification needed. It's only when that sound or that ol sound takes up an entire syllable, which typically is always at the end of a word. One other thing that's difficult about singing in English is the treatment of the diphthong. Now, what is a diphthong? I do talk about this in the Singer's Language Part 1, but it's where you encounter a vowel that creates two sounds. So it comes up most frequently in English with the letter I. The letter is I, but when you see it in certain circumstances, like the word light, sight, kite, might, it actually produces two sounds, ah and e together. Kite, light, might. It just happens so quickly in speech that we often don't notice it. However, when we go to sing, we need to sustain the first of the two sounds. So if I'm going to sing the word I, and I always use the either Dolly Parton or Whitney Houston song, And I Will Always Love You, right? Dolly Parton, and I will, and the E comes out at the very end, versus Whitney Houston, and I will always, right? I think I got those correct in terms of who does which. But regardless, one person chooses to kind of play with the diphthong for artistic reasons, and one person does it more traditionally, where you just hold the first of the two vowel sounds, and at the last second, you sort of morph over into that E sound. Okay, so if you were to be singing in, say, Italian, the treatment of the diphthong is different. You're going to have oftentimes more of a 1-to-1 ratio where you really clearly hear the two vowel sounds of io, mio, right? You hear them both, right? Versus English where, again, in speech, you probably didn't even realize there were two vowel sounds because it's the first one that's really, really dominant. So whenever you have a diphthong in English, you really want to look out from making sure that you keep the first vowel sound really, really long, and that you tilt to the second vowel sound at the last possible second. Again, it happens mostly with the letter I, but you'll hear it with O, right? It's like, we don't sing a pure O. We don't. That sounds weird, right? We kind of morph it or tilt it toward an U vowel at the end. So tomorrow, like that song from Annie. Tomorrow, right? The last second I close down to that U. So that's the other thing that's tricky about English. You want to look out for those diphthongs, and you want to make sure that whenever they occur, you're sustaining the first of the two vowel sounds. Last thing I want to say is just why English is so hard to sing in versus some other languages. When you think about music, music is horizontal, right? We make these really, really long lines that kind of go this way. Particularly ballads, right? That's not to say that it can't have a beat, but just in general, when we're singing, there's this sort of fluid feeling of movement that goes in a more horizontal direction. English is a very vertical language. It's kind of choppy and chewy, and so that makes it difficult. Additionally, to articulate certain words, we have to pull the tongue back, right? Some of these sounds that we have in English mechanically are not great for singing. So languages like Spanish, Italian, French, these romance languages tend to be a little easier to sing in, particularly if you speak them fluently, because they have more of this melodic like quality to them. They're much more fluid. They are more horizontal in nature. They don't have chewy consonants like we have. So they just lend themselves better to music than English does. So if you're finding that when you sing on warm-ups or you sing on vowels, things feel easy, and then you go to sing on words and you're like, why is this so much harder? Well, especially if you're singing in English, that's why. The mechanics of it just aren't always conducive to what we want to do in speech. So sometimes we modify the way we say the words so that it makes it easier to sing them. I hope that helps you understand a little bit more about singing in English, particularly the treatment of R's and L's, but also of diphthongs. As always, you guys, feel free to comment and make a request for what you'd like to see. Sometimes I run out of ideas, so it's actually really helpful if you guys let me know what you want to learn about. And in the meantime, good luck and happy singing.